Okay. All right, I'm gonna let everyone in and we're gonna start. Hello, everybody, and welcome to On the Air with ANEA. I'm so excited to spend the next hour with you all. So my name is Aryah. I'm the Coalition Coordinator for the Act Now End AIDS Coalition, or ANEA. And ANEA is a national organization or coalition of community-based organizations, health departments, and national organizations committed to ending AIDS as an epidemic in the United States. We got started in 2016, and since its inception, ANEA has prioritized the leadership of people living with HIV and those most impacted by the structural determinants that put people at risk to the virus. So we know what we mean by that. Black folks, Latinx folks, Indigenous folks, other communities of color, those who are aging, young people, and a whole list of other communities in this country. So we're super excited to welcome you to this very first On the Air. This is a new program for ANEA. So each month, ANEA is going to bring you a topic, and we're going to discuss it from two different perspectives, community and government. So today's topic is the 2020 election and what's at stake as it relates to HIV. Anyway, the dust settles, we know that there's going to be a lot of important work to do. Before we jump into everything, I'm so excited to introduce my co-host, Crystal Townsend, the End HIV Houston Coordinator. Turning it over to you, Crystal.
Hi, everybody. I'm so happy to see so many folks in the Zoom room, and then we're all set up on Facebook too. So I'm excited to have this conversation. I want to give a disclaimer. This is not a panel, okay? So we want this to be a conversation amongst the folks in the Zoom room, folks that are watching on Facebook, and have conversations about different topics. Yes, today we are talking about our the issues that are important to us as a coalition of folks living with HIV, advocates, folks that work for organizations that serve people living with HIV. We started this work years ago just to focus on ending the HIV epidemic. We were able to reimagine that, and now this is where we are. So I want to introduce our guests. We have Aryah Lester. She is the Deputy Director of the Transgender Strategy Center. We have Marco Castro-Bojorquez. I might have said that wrong, but Marco, I'm sure you'll correct me. Marco is the co-chair of the HIV Racial Justice Now, as well as a filmmaker and creative. And then we have Lizzie Lovinger. She is the Senior Government Relations and Policy Officer at Treatment Action Group. And so my pronouns are she, her. If I got any of your pronouns wrong, then please correct me. And folks that are in the Zoom room, like type your names in the chat. We would love to see where you're from. We're gonna have a conversation first, and then we'll open it up to you all for questions. To start us off, I wanted to ask Aryah, Marco, Lizzie, and even Edric. Okay, so I have a fun question for y'all. Let's start off light. I was thinking, like, what's in a name? So oftentimes our names say a lot about us, who we are, where we came from. So, and even like some like quirkiness. So for example, like I'm Crystal. My grandmother wanted to name me Crystal from a character from Dynasty. Was it Dynasty? I don't know. So my mom was not having it. She was like, I don't want to name my daughter that. But, you know, my dad was like, okay, give my mom, like, give her that. So that is my name. But if you look at my last name, it says much more about like where I'm from. So Ward is my maiden name. So my family, my dad's side of the family is from Alabama. My mom's side of the family is from Louisiana. So, you know, folks from Louisiana usually spell their last name with an E, A-U-X. And so that says a lot about where I'm from. I'm a Texas Bama. And I think I'm a fourth generation Texan. I had to really think about that like recently because, you know, we've been here. So it just never occurred to me to really think about how many generations have my family been in Texas. So I wanted to open it up to y'all. You know, what's in a name? Tell us something about where your name came from, or something unique about how you were named, or what's in your name.
What I've always found interesting is that a name is usually the first names that we know ourselves by are things or names that come from outside sources. So like you said, sometimes those names could be ancestral and they could be connected to like your those who have came before you. But then also as a Black person, I think names also come with the connotation of slavery as well. You know, and a lot of the last names of many Black Americans are names that were the last names of those slave owners. And so that is always just an interesting thing. And then when you put the trans connotation on top of it, and even outside of trans, you know, we all find that name that really suits us once we get to know ourselves, and be that a nickname or a variant of the name that you were given at birth, or a whole new name that you know, more correctly defines who you are than that which you were given. So I think names are always an interesting conversation to bring up.
Yeah, I agree. It is definitely like interesting to really explore, like, well, what is in my name? And to even, you know, as a Black person who comes from enslaved people, that is like a very interesting question to ask. And so I want to see, you know, Marco, Lizzie, Ezzy, what about y'all?
You know, before I tell you my name, which by the way you pronounce it perfectly, I wanted to acknowledge that I'm speaking to you all from Washoe territory, and I acknowledge and honor the original inhabitants of this region. I also recognize and honor their ancestral grounds that I reside and learn upon, and support the resilience and strength that all indigenous people have shown worldwide. I am currently connecting with you from my home in Reno, Nevada, where is on the traditional and beautiful territory of the Washoe people. And I now wanted to say that my name, I love my name. I do have an alter ego, is Santiago, my alter ego. Um, I, um, I wanted to name my cats Santiago, regardless of their gender, but then something else happens. And so my name was basically, my real name is Marco Alonso Castro-Bojorquez. And it sounds like a Mexican telenovela name, right? Like the telenovela. And so when I came to the US at the beginning, it was just Marco Castro. But then when my mom passed away in 2001, I decided to just link my two last names because her last name was Bojorquez. So my name is very important because it has both my father and my mom's surname, is that surname or last name, in it. And it's very meaningful. So people sometimes, it's a very racist thing to do when people try to change your name just because they don't know how to pronounce, or they see it very difficult. So I very kindly ask people to like, no, that's Marco Castro is not my name. My name is Marco Castro Bojorquez. So those of us that have a hyphenated last name probably understand the struggles. But I really like my name. And in Mexico, we don't have, I think that in Mexico, we did something which we empowered ourselves after the conquest. We became mestizos, right? Which is the mix of Indians and Europeans. And we all, most of us in Mexico, embrace sort of like that part of it. Um, and, uh, and unfortunately, there is discrimination against Indian communities in Mexico, like in the rest of Latin America. And that's why I wanted to do the acknowledgement. So yeah, thanks for the question.
That was beautiful. Edric or Lizzie?
I can go. So, Edric Figueroa, my parents actually found my first name in a book. Um, and so it's not from Latin America. It was actually the name of a Viking, apparently, a long time ago. And is the English way to pronounce it and the Old English way is Edric. And so my whole life I've been Edric and Edric. And recently, like in my 30s, I made a decision that I wanted to be just Edric because that's the name that's my family calls me. That's the name that resonates with my heart, right? My abuela gives me a hug and she's like, Edricito, it's so good to see you every time. Pre-COVID world, I got to see her. Yeah, and so Marco, thank you for always bringing it back to the different ways that colonization has impacted all of us and spread an anti-Indigenous sentiment across the world and globally, because my last name is Figueroa. Yeah, I like my last name because it feels musical, Figaro, 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 but I do wish that I had more of a tie to some of my Indigenous background. Maybe one day I'll go back and do all that deep digging into my roots. So Lizzie, it's on you.
Yeah, I want to thank Marco for sort of grounding us in that acknowledgement and respect to the Indigenous peoples who originally inhabited the land on which he's sort of speaking to us today. I want to do the same. I'm sort of calling in right now from what's now referred to as Washington, D.C. It was originally the land of Piscataway and Anacostan peoples. I don't have, as far as I know, I don't have any Indigenous ancestry, but I did really appreciate what Marco was saying about, and what Edric was saying about sort of, I think, resisting how others want to, I think, what others want to put onto your name. And unfortunately, I think my name is not a great example of that. So my last name, Lovinger, is, it originally was a very different last name that indicated which tribe my dad's family is from Jewish people. So we're the Levi tribe. So it was basically a Hungarian way of saying like son of Levi, but it's been changed a lot, basically to make it easier for English-speaking people to pronounce it. And my first name, my parents chose for me very lovingly. I was named after my Aunt Edith. But later on in my life, my mom did admit to me that she wanted to name me what my Hebrew name is, Eliana, and chose not to because she thought it would be harder for people to pronounce, and she didn't want people to pronounce it incorrectly my whole life, so she named me Elizabeth instead. So I still go by Eliana in like religious observances and stuff like that. But so yeah, I think my name is it's an interesting mix of where I come from and a lot of those sort of concessions that were made.
I really appreciate that. Thank you for sharing. And I know we're about to get right into like setting the tone of what happened when we spoke with the Biden campaign. So I guess let's jump right into it. Set the tone for us. Like, what was that day like? And I'm asking you all this, thinking about a lot of what you all said, and just in sharing a little bit of background about, you know, who you are, where you come from, and even the lands that we are on. There are so many issues that we are trying to tackle in this moment. And so I think about what was the tone of that day. And I'm thinking about this from the perspective of like folks who are like policy wonks, but also folks that are like new to all of this. You've never talked to an elected official before. And so really kind of like setting the tone of like, what was that day like for y'all? What was that experience like?
Yeah, so I can give a little bit of a background just around the coalition's history with engaging with presidential candidates. So in 2016, ANEA actually got to meet with Clinton and Sanders and their staffers. They actually got to do it in person because they weren't in the middle of a pandemic. I'm told that they were short and very different meetings, but nonetheless, they were meetings. So similarly, into 2016. In 2020, we reached out to every potential presidential and vice presidential candidate in hopes of securing a meeting. But the pandemic happened. People were, obviously responding to that and everything else that's been going on in this country. So we actually didn't get a meeting with the Biden campaign until September. And in September, we got to meet with some staffers. So we met with their campaign manager, Rufus Gifford, their senior policy advisor, Carmel Martin, their LGBTQ director, Reggie Greer, and their AAPI deputy vote director, Howard Wu. So it was a productive meeting, but as you'll see, that meeting list didn't include Biden or Harris themselves. So it was also a little bit of a disappointing tone for the beginning because we actually wanted to have some virtual FaceTime with the actual candidates, because we know that this community, the people on this call today, our guests, and the people in the coalition have put a lot of energy and time and work into making sure that HIV stays on the radar, including launching a policy paper with over 350 organizations that the ANEA coalition put out that was a roadmap to end HIV in this country by 2025. I'll talk more about that in our call to action at the end of today's session. But so we put out our own plan, a community-led plan to do that before this current administration had their federal plan. So we know the topic, we know the work. So it was disheartening that we didn't get that face-to-face time. However, the folks that we did talk to were really receptive. And like you said, Crystal, we brought everybody that we knew was going to bring the big guns. So we brought the policy geeks, we brought the activists, we brought the executive directors. And I felt like the tone of the meeting was really actually well received. And the issues that we raised, from making sure trans folks, people who are aging with HIV, and that representation on a federal level from every community impacted by HIV was present, were really heard. So yeah, I'm curious as to, Aryah, Lizzie, and Marco, what some of the issues during that meeting you were paying attention to, because all of you were part of that meeting. And right now, as we approach election day, what are you tracking? What policy issues or other human rights occurrences are on y'all's radar?
Well, for me, it brought up all of the feelings of HIV being a pandemic in of itself, and an epidemic for decades, right? And why it's still the same way decades later is because of the structural systems that are built that don't work for Black and brown people, period. And so that's evidence in HIV, it's evidence in COVID-19 rates and data that we see. And so HIV, even though in some eyes it may seem like, oh, well, we've just been dealing with this for so long, it can't be something that we just think about, in the later in the later hours of the night, that is, when we come to political wise and policies and our lawmakers and decision makers. And right now with the administration, with the whole plan to end the epidemic, it was created out of funds that were funneled that didn't really have the heart in it, attached to, really wanting to do that. We know that the current administration is based on selfish ideals. And so it was really important, at least for me and the communities that I represent, that the opposing candidates actually took the time out of their day to show that, the importance of this, of HIV, of Black and brown people, of trans people and women and elderly, and Asian people, and Latinx communities, Hispanic communities. Like, we were all there, and that was an opportunity. And so it was a little disheartening, but then, like you said, Udrick, the response that we got from the staffers that were there was something that was positive. I felt that they really were engaged in the conversation and really even started to kind of formulate some plans of action towards the end of that call that we can always touch back on. So it also was hopeful, but it was a mixture of feelings for me.
Yeah, for me, that I totally agree with Aryah on her reflection. For me, I was at the meeting with in 2016 with no, I didn't make it to the Hillary Clinton one, but I did went to we met with Edric, what's his name? I'm an elder, y'all.
Sanders.
With Sanders, and it was kind of like a debacle after the meeting. There was he misrepresented the group of activists that met with him, and I find him that he needed to be more knowledgeable about transgender issues specifically, and so it was quite a trip to meet with him and his staff. I tend to be very, although I have been working for many years with communities, I tend to be very skeptical about politicians. I don't trust them by nature. I think that most of them have good intentions and then they get corrupted by the system. And so I wanted to just depart from everything that I say about this is that I'm departing for a system that is broken and that is racist in its inception and creation and transphobic and homophobic and xenophobic. So that's from where I'm gonna go, and so I was pissed that they weren't in the meeting, and I'm gonna speak about my identity as an immigrant because it's a lot more stronger than my identity as a person living with HIV. For me, these past 4 years have been, and the years of Obama, there were many challenges as well. But these past 4 years, it took it to a next level where I really start questioning the humanity. Like, what is it that we're doing with this world, and how is it that it's so upside down? And so, witnessing the treatment of immigrant people in this country the past 4 years has been one of the most devastating experiences in my life. And I honestly don't understand how we allowed for this government to continue for less than a month. Because in the very first week, in the very first day that he started doing this work, we have been attacked constantly. And so I wanted to have the opportunity to talk to the candidate because I feel that he wrote in his democratic plan a 21st century immigration reform, which is one of the most important issues for me. It's important because I feel like our people really have gone through a lot right now. And I thought that what happened in the pandemic and how easy and crystal clear was, the pandemic basically show us how systemic racism really affects the health of people. That there have been plenty of studies where they show Black people to be at the same level economically than white folks, and they still have less expectancy on lives and health in general. So if we don't address that, we're gonna continue, all of our communities are gonna continue suffering and having these conversations over and over again. So I want for people to stop. I cannot deal with being bureaucratic or like politically correct anymore because they have diminished my life. They have attempted to take away my dignity, and I'm still here. Like I am not going anywhere. And people that are undocumented in this country deserve every single human right that anybody else, and they certainly don't deserve the way they have been treated. So I was really disappointed. I said it in the meeting. I know that for some people, they don't think that is a great tactic. I'm beyond those things. Like I pass being tactical with the government. When the government has been there trying to kill me for the past 4 years, where would I get the inspiration for tactics? You tell me. So I didn't really appreciate it. I still think that it was a lack of respect for all of us and the work that we do. And although I acknowledge that we have to continue working with the system is broken.
Wow. I am like really taking in a lot of what Marco said. And at first, so Edric explained to you that the goal of On the Air is to really like bring together community with, you know, folks that work within our health departments. But I'm starting to really believe that we needed to have this conversation with just us. And if we do have folks from the health departments who are on the line in the Zoom room or watching on Facebook, like we are always open to working together. Sometimes we have no choice because you are the holder of the resources. So we don't have a choice. We don't have much choice. But it is truly, truly, you know, frustrating to try to work within a system that was not meant to care for us. And so I felt that. I don't know if you had anything to add, Lizzie.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with everything that was said so far. I think one of the things I was sort of most looking for from the meeting was if the team was going to sort of give the impression that they thought they could end the HIV epidemic through purely sort of biomedical interventions, or if they acknowledged the role of social determinants of health, the role of community power and agency in what needs to happen to end the epidemics. And I feel like there was an acknowledgement of it in a lot of what they were saying, but I didn't see quite as much concrete planning for community engagement and leadership as I would have liked to see in their responses, and really how again very concretely how they're planning to centralize the role and the voice and the leadership of people most directly affected by the HIV epidemic, including people living with HIV, but then also HIV negative people from the most directly impacted communities, including Black and Brown people, men who have sex with men, trans people. So again, you know, I think there was some acknowledgement of it. I would have liked to see more. And I would have liked to see, I think, a more sort of solidified planning for that. But,
Yeah. I'm starting to think about, you know, Edric and I had we were thinking about some questions to really ask y'all. And we started to think about like, what could any presidential administration, because we requested meetings with the Biden campaign, their team, and the Trump administration. And so we were able to get a meeting with the Biden campaign, but not able to secure a meeting with the Trump administration. So, you know, what could any type of presidential administration do to effectively like help us in the HIV epidemic in our communities, when we know like Black and Brown communities are largely impacted, and we know the dynamics of our people. We know how we talk about health, and we know how we trust or don't trust government, or even like the healthcare system is so sometimes not even accessible. Even when you have insurance, it's just a hard thing to kind of navigate. So, you know, what could any administration do to really help us concretely in the HIV epidemic?
Well, that's the conundrum, Crystal. It goes hand in hand with what Lizzie and Marco just said, because the solutions are community-based. You know, the community already knows how to reach those that the government deems unreachable. They already know what type of programs specifically suit themselves, you know, when it's homegrown and when when it's made by the community to work for that community. But to adopt that community level of engagement on a governmental level would take a presidential candidate or the administration, when you bring in Marco's thing, is to break up that same system that set them up to be where they're at. So, you know, it gets really more overly complicated when you look at it, to where you almost need someone who is more sacrificial. You know, the same way that we tell people that want to become allies or accomplices to, you know, certain social standpoints, is that they have to use their privilege and be able to give up, you know, and sacrifice pieces of that privilege in order to really, you know, make the greatest effect on communities that are less deserving in the eyes of the government and don't have as much privilege. And so that's kind of what it'll take on an administrative level. But how do we make that environment possible, you know? And I think it's connected to, like, you know, of how we say that power of the voter, the power of the people. And I think that the political division that we're seeing is really also bringing to light more of the power that we have as individuals to kind of shape things to be shooken up and kind of change the way that this administration has changed things in the last 4 years. I think we're kind of using some of that in a different kind of scope.
For me, this is Marco. For me, I want for the administration, whichever administration. By the way, I don't think that I have the bandwidth to actually deal with a Trump administration. If they were to meet with us, I think that I will ask my allies to represent me, because it's traumatic to even consider to talk to someone who has intentionally have been trying to really like damage our communities. So I'm not for that. But I do want to say that if the Biden administration, which is my hope that in a few days you'll vote and that you support his platform, although it's not perfect, is what we have. I think is a better choice that we have, because only I don't know. I will never consider not for even 1 second to vote for Trump. But anyways, I would like for the administration to actually take a look at the plan to end HIV, and to actually rewrite it in a way where everybody is included, because we cannot end anything, not even the HIV or the coronavirus, without including every single person that is alive. That's just an absolute. It's not negotiable for me. I'm not gonna debate about it with anybody. Like, that's the truth. And so if we don't include folks that don't have access to healthcare, for example, when are we going to end the HIV? We also need to stop playing games with us, with the public, where you are giving. You're creating a plan to end HIV, but you're trying to take away my healthcare. How is that gonna work? You know, that's ridiculous. That's actually, and we just go along with the narrative and we play along. I can't do that. And so the other thing that I think specifically that I'm concerned is about, because of the coronavirus and before because of HIV, is about data and surveillance. So that is an important issue for me. And I think that right now, the plan has one of the pillars of this plan for this administration to end HIV/AIDS requires surveillance of people, and it's called molecular HIV surveillance, where they take a sample from you that you gave away to do another test, a test for resilience, and they take that sample without your consent, and they do testings to create what they call clusters, which is they're trying to find the directionality of the infection, right? And to me, that's just because the public health department is connected to the authorities and to the criminal justice or injustice system and to even ICE. I find that is ridiculous that after we know that communities that are the most affected by HIV struggle at trusting the health system in this country, we're still putting these things that they're nothing but barriers for people to actually continue testing, treatment, and care. And so I find that we have had a long struggle with the data of people living with HIV and the systems, and we are going to continue to resist because we feel that is, well, I think that is actually very dangerous. Right now, there is people in Boston, I think, that that the first responders have the information of who has coronavirus in the city, right? Apparently because of prevention, but that is a complete disruption or invasion of our privacy. Can you imagine, like, people the first somebody that from the I was gonna say the Red Cross, but like a first responder to come to my house to help me, and if they knew that I was HIV positive, how do you think that I'm gonna be treated in general? So we cannot do that, and I think that that's a piece that for me is very specific. But I think that we should not be taking without consent samples of people and just do all kinds of things, potentially having those folks being even deported, which is kind of insane. So that's my.
So I think you brought up something really, really important, Marco. And I wanted to ask Lizzie, because before you talked about human rights, and a part of this is, you know, understanding the difference between like how public health systems should respond to something like a pandemic, and then our own individual body autonomy and our own individual human rights. I'm not sure that we're having that conversation enough, especially when we're talking about HIV. But I wanted to see if you had any thoughts about what Marco was saying, especially with molecular HIV surveillance, because we don't just do it with HIV, we do it with other things like TB, even the flu. So I wonder if you have some thoughts on that.
Yeah, thank you, Crystal. I definitely agree. I think you know, a lot of human rights abuses that sort of happen within the context of public health right now are not an accident. They are a result of sort of legacies of racism and colonialism in the way that public health has been structured really for centuries. You know, one thing in particular that I think I'm really drawing on is in the context of tuberculosis, Dr. Salman Kasavji, who works out of Harvard Medical School, has really spoken quite a lot about sort of the origins of public health as a colonialist sort of enterprise, and how it was really brought about sort of with the goal of protecting colonizers from what they saw as colonized people as sort of vectors of disease, right? And so if we think about the ways in which, yes, Marco, I'm happy to, it was actually a presentation that he gave at the International Union Conference, and I can try and find it. I don't know if it's recorded, but I'll try and find something. But if we sort of think about the ways in which, you know, a lot of public health interventions are structured now and how heavily they depend upon things like biomedical interventions, they're really echoes of that kind of foundation in colonialism, and not necessarily sort of centering the individual and collective importance of human rights when we're approaching all kinds of public health matters, including infectious diseases. And it's not centering the whole health of the person or the community, right? It's centering this concern about stopping a disease. I think that for us to sort of move forward, there has to be a more widespread acknowledgement from those in positions of public health sort of power and decision making of that being kind of the root cause of what's going on. And I really liked what Aryah said about sort of people having to give something up, having to give privilege up. Because I think so often in conversations about sort of ending racism and white supremacy and other forms of oppression, people have used this, it's almost like a meme, but they try and use this saying of like, you know, rights aren't pie, you know, if somebody else gets more, you don't get less, which I think kind of distracts from the reality that like, if we're going to sort of achieve equity, health equity for all people and human rights, like people will have to give something up. People in power will have to give something up. And convincing people that they won't have to is just doing a disservice to our end goal. And so I think part of this is going to be people who are already in positions of power and decision-making having to sort of really re-examine if their level of experience and their lived experience is appropriate for the work that they're doing. And I don't think we're at that place yet. And I think that's really just one small piece of what we need to do to kind of dismantle these legacies of colonialism and white supremacy in our approach to ending HIV and really ending all sort of negative health impacts for all people.
Now, I wanted to just quickly add that we have the opportunity to learn what we've done good with HIV to apply it to coronavirus. But what we need to do is like the public health departments needs to stop. They do all these things with data and with our tissues, with our bodies, in the name of protecting the public health, right? But the people that are affected, the most affected, which is in the case of HIV, people living with HIV, are never the public in public health. We're never that public. We're considered the opposite. We're considered those who need to be observed, they need to be criminalized, need to be kept somewhere under the microscope, and it's not contributing to end HIV. To the contrary, it's doing the total contrary. So I think that it's important that that everybody that works, we are very privileged to work in the HIV movement because we have changed completely how public health is actually managed in the world in general. And so we need to look at that and use that wealth of knowledge, our ancestors, so many people that died of HIV in the worst, horrible way, they should not be dying of coronavirus at this point because we have learned something from the past, you know? Sorry. Yeah.
No, you're great. No, I really think that that's absolutely true. And so many of the COVID first responders are folks that we know. They're people in our field. And so we need to get that credit where credit due is also. So everything that everyone has shared so far has been brilliant. I really struck me that piece around public health as another tool of colonization or the legacy of that. So I'm really curious about what stood out to some of the people who are listening, either in the Zoom or on the Facebook chat. We would love to take any questions from you. You're welcome to type them in the chat, or if you'd like to ask your question live and go on the air with us, you can type live in the chat box and I'll unmute you if you are in the Zoom. So we'll take just a second to do that. I'm pulling up the Facebook right now.
Aryah, did you have something to say while folks are getting their questions together?
Oh, it was just a little portion onto what Lizzie and Marco were talking about, especially when you were talking about colonialism, when it comes to public health. And it made me think of the medical field in general and how it's based on white male supremacy, when a lot of our medical research done in early centuries were done on cadavers that were taken from these same populations that we're still fighting for, you know, today, sex workers, women, Black and brown people, and that is the actual basis of our whole, you know, all of the little factions of the medical field in general, and not even just public health.
Thank you for that, Tana. Go ahead.
You know, when you talk about HIV and the election, but just human rights in general, I'm Tana from, I'm a part of Positive Women's Network, Greater Houston. I'm one of the co-founders. But when we talk about policies and we talk about elected officials, this election is the most crucial election coming up, because when we think about it, it's not just about the presidential election, it's about the state and local officials also. So when we talk about changing the narrative, that comes from women's rights, criminalization laws that affect people living with HIV, men and women, but also just their human dignity. These elected officials really work for the people. And I would like to say, as far as H-Town Power goes, which is the affiliate of Positive Women's Network, just being a part of seeing the change in Harris County itself, being a part of reaching over 100,000 voters, asking them to get out to vote, get to the polls, giving them and educating. The main thing is educating the community on who you're voting for and what's at stake. This is our livelihood for Black and brown communities.
Thank you so much for that, Tana. And like I've been, you know, involved in watching the work that you all are doing in Houston, Harris County around the election. And, you know, I know that when we phone bank and reach out to folks in our community, we've been really asking them, like, what issues matter to you? Because Marco mentioned, like, if we are going to end any type of HIV epidemic, we have to reach beyond, like, what we traditionally know and who is traditionally involved. And we have to talk to people in our communities that we don't know. And some of the issues that they bring up is, you know, hey, thanks for reaching out to me to let me know that the election is coming, but I don't hear from y'all after this season. So what's up with that? And so we've been really thinking about how we can transition the electoral organizing into organizing throughout the year to really speak to what folks want, to the issues that matter to them, like healthcare, like the abuse of power in our policing systems, like job opportunities. So these are all things that people outside of our traditional planning groups are talking about. And this is what our cousins are talking about. This is what our families are talking about. This is what our friends are talking about. So I appreciate you sharing the work of PWN and H-Town Power.
Yeah, so we have another question in the chat. This question comes from Trey Watkins. Thanks for the question, Trey. So the question is, how do we begin to address the mistrust of the medical and political systems in predominantly communities of color? Are there best practices that panelists might point to and concrete actions that should be taken? Great question, Trey. So I'll give our panelists just a second to sit with that.
I've heard this before because, you know, I also have some governmental contracts here in DC, Piscataway, Conroy, Anacostan ancestral lands. And Well, what I kind of come around to is that think about that nurse that's your cousin, you know, or that family member that that went to law school and graduated, and we're all congratulating them. You know, these are all also members of the same system, and there's a lot of good people that have made this lifetime careers for themselves that aren't just in the revolving administration level of positions that we see. And a lot of those individuals are, you know, in our healthcare system and in our government, you know, and have um, different goals that go beyond the 4 or 8 years that one president, you know, may be in office. And there's a lot of them that I work with, and there's a lot of them, you know, that are available for other people to work with. And, you know, I think that that's the beginning of, I'm not saying to trust the systems, you know, but trust that there are good people that are part of the systems, but then also know how to navigate that system in order to keep themselves in decision-making power, but then also allow community power to be injected and kind of pulled in on the side on a regular basis. So that's kind of where my thinking usually goes along that question when I've been asked it.
I know, Marco, you were gonna say something, but
Go ahead.
go ahead, Marco. Go ahead.
No, please, Crystal, go ahead.
I was just thinking about that question because sometimes when we get questions like that, we think about like our health departments and their role. And sometimes we do have good examples of engagement from that level. We see it in Baltimore City with their health department and the work that they're doing and the ways that they're doing it, even in their engagement on social media. But what we don't always get to know is all of the work and time and red tape that those individuals who are doing good work within that system are going through. And we don't always get to know how much they are putting themselves on the line. And we don't know the conversations between them and their, you know, maybe CDC officer who says, oh yeah, that's nice, but that's too much. So sometimes we don't get to be privy to those conversations, but we see it. When you see a glimpse of it, that's because it's working. But when it goes away, we have to start really questioning why and building relationships with folks that work in these places to have to get honest answers. And I don't know if we always have that luxury, because I feel like, again, going back to like relinquishing power and being able to sacrifice, and we're talking about sacrificing your livelihood. So folks are, I don't know if folks are like ready for that. I just don't know.
You know, I also want to say that well, in Houston, actually, I have a very good friend that works in the health department system. His name is Moctezuma, so a shout out to Mocte because he does amazing work, and he knows my positions and what I think. But we're able to like dialogue, and I know that he wants the best for our community. And a lot of those people that are in the CDC, that are in all these entities that really are part of our community, sometimes they may feel ostracized because we do a lot of oppositional advocacy, which is, we have to. So I think that a shout out to everybody that support us and that are part of a system, including the government, that actually is. I think that we see you and we hear you, and we love you. I also want to say that as, to answer the question of Trey, which thank you for appreciating our panel, although we're not a panel, that I wanted to say to Trey that a very concrete example of how you can actually tackle the mistrust is in the case of my community is to observe language justice. You know, people need to understand what the heck are we talking about in order for them to feel included and to feel that they can actually have something to say. So all of the health departments in the world actually should consider what other languages my community that I serve speak And we need to tailor those programs, as Tanya was saying earlier in a comment here in the chat box. We need to tailor those programs accordingly. And I always say this: the easiest way for an ally of the Latinx community to act in our favor is to think about language justice. And so interpret your stuff, translate your written words, interpret your spoken words, and translate your written words, and that's gonna give it's gonna provide a glimpse of trust to communities that have been basically neglected for so long.
Yeah, thank you for that. I mean, that is a question that we could have an entire session on. And I think that one of the things the coalition is doing by having a platform like this is that we're trying to build some of that trust by putting a face to the folks who are doing this work. So hopefully we'll get to invite more folks in public health and in government offices so that we can see them and start to build some of those relationships, because that's where we're gonna really see some momentum and things changing. For the long haul. So not just the one time you had a town hall checkbox community engagement done. We know that that's not going to work for us, that we're going to need to be in conversation constantly with one another to end HIV, to end COVID, and to address racism that's so embedded in these institutions. So we are about getting close to time. Thank you everyone who stuck with us for this first On the Air. So each On the Air session, we want to wrap up with a call to action, because we know that action is what it takes to fight pandemics and everything else going on right now in this year and all the years before that have impacted communities of color in this country and people living with HIV. So election day is less than a week away. Super important to make a plan and vote. If people don't have access to the PWN Positive Women's Network toolkit, they really have a comprehensive list of things you can do to keep yourself safe when you're going to the polls. And for those folks on this call who are working with the community of people living with HIV, or maybe are living with HIV yourselves, there's also sort of a debrief, a check-in that we can invite you to on November 5th. And any way the dust settles, people can come and join that to be with community and not do this in isolation. We know it's a weird year. We want you all to know that ANEA is here for you. And I also wanted to give a shout out. I mentioned that we updated our community roadmap to end HIV this year. You can find that on our website at anea.org and see the recommendations. We took into account that the COVID pandemic happened this year, that this is a historic moment as the Black Lives Matter uprisings inspire all of us to do better. So check out those updates, and if you are interested in getting involved in any aspect of the coalition, please get in touch with me. And I'll turn it over to Crystal with any last thoughts in this 1 minute we've got left.
I think this was really a really great start for our first On the Air, not a panel, but kind of a panel.
Yeah.
So, and I appreciate everybody who's on. I appreciate Aryah, Lizzie, and Marco for joining us. I don't know if y'all have some words, but you know, the final thing I'll say is please go vote. Everybody, encourage folks to vote. We're trying to bring some joy to the polls this week. So I want to open it up to y'all to see if y'all have closing words before we hop off.
Same thing. Take joy in your individual power. You know, no matter how this election turns out, you know, go out and vote and make a thing out of it, because it should be a thing, because you're putting your voice towards a lot of things and trying to make sure that all of peoples, like Marco said, everyone who's living, you know, can have the same opportunity.
Yeah, I will absolutely echo that. Absolutely make a plan to vote if you can. And if you can vote, or even if you haven't been given the right to vote by the federal government, still hold your elected officials accountable. Call them, email them. They might not be physically in their offices right now because of COVID, but they still have email addresses and phone numbers. And do everything you can to reach them, organize with community members to contact them, and keep demanding what you need from them after Election Day because they work for you.
I want just to address very quickly those that are disheartened by all of this, that they feel that there is no hope. Something that really helps me is this thought that of John Trudell when he talks about power. And John Trudell said that, you know, those millionaires, the governments, the presidents, that they think that they have a lot of power, the capitalist folks, he said that that is not really power, that that's an imitation of power, that the real power, he said that in reality, that is brutality, and that we, the people, are the ones that hold the power, that the people that are close to our Mother Earth, that are close to each other, that practice empathy, we are the powerful. So in case that you're feeling disempowered by all of this, remember that that is not real power, that is brutality, and you are the powerful. So thank you, ANEA, and thank all of my non-panelists. I love you, and it's great to make these connections because I know that we can continue this conversation. And to everybody that joined us to this very first On the Air with ANEA, I think that you should come back next month?
Yep.
Yeah, next month, right?
Yeah.
Thank
We'll
you.
see you next month, everybody. Thank you to all our panelists and thank you to all our guests.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Thank you so much.
Thank you all.